Wow, what a hard act to follow that will be. Yeah, an amazing conversation with the president, and also I thought the introductory speeches were quite emotive, yeah, quite moving. So now I have to pivot to electrification, which is the topic of my talk, which is quite difficult to do, but I like that the conversation ended on optimism, and I think that's where I will end myself as well. And it's great to have this conversation in Finland. I live in the UK, and as you know, if you follow me on LinkedIn, I love heat pumps because they're so efficient. And in the UK, I'm always told that heat pumps don't work when it's very cold. We're in Finland today, and do you know which country in the world has the second highest penetration of heat pumps? It's Finland. So it's a great place to talk about electrification, and Finland is miles ahead. So what I wanted to do today is first to take a quick look at where we are today, then look at the opportunity for electrification across the sectors, and then conclude. So I'm going to start by just taking a quick look at where we are when we look at energy markets right now. We've all seen the news of gas prices spiking, oil prices spiking after the war in the Middle East started. And just this morning I checked, we're still about 60–70% above pre-war levels. So this is still an issue that is ongoing, it's not over, and indeed many people believe it will continue for quite some time. So we are in a different world altogether. And maybe referring back to the conversation, this has really started, I think, crisis mode policy making in Europe, which is an opportunity that we should grasp. So that's where we are, and when we look at the different sectors, we have actually done quite well in electricity when it comes to phasing out fossil fuels, and particularly imported fossil fuels, but not so well in the other sectors. So here you see what is the share of fossil fuels in each of the sectors, and you see transport, almost all of it is still based on fossil fuels, mainly imported in the form of oil, but also buildings and industry still heavily reliant on fossil fuels, mainly imported. And power, electricity, has done incredibly well when it comes to decarbonisation. We're now, and I haven't checked the very latest figures, but we're now probably approaching a situation where about 3/4 of European electricity will be from nuclear renewables and no longer be based on fossil fuels. That's a major transformation, and I think we should be quite proud of that as Europeans, having achieved that in such a short time. However, we are in very different stages when it comes to decarbonisation across Europe. And quite recently, you may have seen some of the headlines in the Financial Times about Spain, and I myself have written about this. Gas prices still set the price in a lot of power markets. I mean, Italy is probably the country that is worth pointing out here at the very top, where most of the time gas plants set the price. At the other end of the spectrum, you have countries like Spain that used to be quite high up in that ranking order, but have managed to squeeze gas out of the power market, where now gas no longer dominates the power markets in Spain. So you see here how wholesale prices correlate with the number of hours per year when prices are set by gas-fired power stations. And you see there's a very strong correlation indeed. And when you look at any of the other factors, this is by far the strongest factor that determines how high prices are at a given day in a given place. And what this also means is that, of course, in a crisis situation, when you have high gas prices, that filters right through to power markets if you have a high gas share when it comes to setting the price. And Spain is really an interesting case here, I think, and one to watch given how fast it has managed to transition from a situation of very, very many hours of gas setting the price to now very few. And countries are along 6 different phases in the transition. This is from the International Energy Agency, actually quite an old report now, but I think still incredibly useful. And it shows where countries may have been in the past and how they transition to very high penetration of renewables. So let's take phase 1 here. This is maybe Germany 25 years ago, when just a few solar installations and wind farms were added. Didn't really have a big impact on the power system at the time because it was just a few percentage points. Didn't really change prices. But then if you fast forward, actually Germany is probably now sitting in phase 5 even, where you have a lot of surplus hours, Maybe was it 3 or 4 weeks ago, we had a whole week when prices were at minus 499 euros per megawatt hour in Germany because of all the solar that was on the system and couldn't be absorbed. And there's all sorts of other things going on with how storage is being used. But we're now clearly moving into phases where countries have so much surplus renewables that prices respond to that in a certain way, negative pricing. And we haven't quite figured out how to reach phase 6. There's not a single country in phase 6 where you actually have a good balance between supply and demand with high share of renewables and storage. Maybe Denmark will be the first country moving in that direction, who knows, because they have now, I think, more than 90% renewables when it comes to electricity. But I think this transition is going to be really interesting to watch how countries go from phase 1 all the way to phase 6. More and more countries we now see going into phase 4 and 5, and I think that is really encouraging. So electricity, I think we're gonna solve that. I know there's still a lot of problems to be solved when it comes to decarbonisation, flexibility, and the integration of variable renewables, interconnection. But overall, I think we're on a very, very good track. But, and I think that's important, and a lot of politicians and also the wider public often don't understand that electricity is not energy. Electricity is only 23% of our energy. The other 77% is fossil fuels, primarily burned mainly for mobility and for heat in industry and buildings. And that is the much harder part to decarbonize. So how do we do that? I think that's where electrification comes in. Before I go there, I think just quickly, because this is a conference about Europe, but this is clearly also a global trend. I actually have a Substack coming out on Sunday looking at Pakistan, and the economics have changed so fundamentally that we now see uptake of solar PV, for example, in Pakistan in a time period as short as 5 years. It's gone from almost nothing to now about a quarter of the electricity in Pakistan, which is a huge success story, you could say, but also there's a flip side. Grid fees are very high in Pakistan, and it's an unmanaged transition rather than one that's managed, and that causes lots of problems. But the main point here I wanted to make is that this has really changed fundamentally, and the economics are now very much more in favor compared to when I started to work on energy in 2004. I remember looking at the cost of solar compared to coal, to gas, much, much more expensive. We needed huge subsidies. We're now in a very different world when it comes to the cost of renewables and storage. I mean, that's the other, I think, side of the coin. We now see storage entering a territory that is unprecedented. California, about a quarter of peak load is now battery storage. And that's squeezing out gas that's expensive, of course, right now, especially in the evening hours, and really helps with the duck curve. But also look at Great Britain here. Big achievements in battery storage. I think Germany now has the biggest pipeline in Europe, according to recent data, of what will come online in the next few years. So battery storage I think, is the other really exciting part of this story that we're probably going to see unfold over the next 3 or 4 years. But let me now pivot to electrification. And I'm going to make a very basic point. This is a complex graph and a complex chart, but I'm going to walk you through it. Electrification, I think the number one asset that it provides, and I was asked this question yesterday over dinner, how would you sell electrification to a politician? I think the number one point is it is vastly more efficient than the alternatives, which are combusting fuels, where most of the energy inputs are actually lost in the process. So let me now turn to this chart. On the left-hand side, you see a Sankey diagram of the current global energy system. Many of you will have seen these diagrams before. Energy inputs and primary energy terms on the left. And then you have end-use sectors on the right, manufacturing, residential sector, transport, and so on, and conversion happening in between. And you see also quite usefully here how much of that energy actually arrives at a useful end use. This is mobility, providing comfort, heat, and buildings, driving industrial processes. About 2/3 or more of all the energy inputs are lost as waste heat in the process. This is from Lawrence National Livermore Laboratory in the US, and we partnered up and worked with them together, and Amber, I see Kingsmill Bond in the audience, who will speak tomorrow as well, and produced this graphic. On the right, you see, this is an imagined system. It's a thought experiment. What if we take the current global energy system, we electrify to the maximum potential with existing technology, and we power this with renewables? What would happen to energy demand overall. And the key message here is we halve primary energy demand on the left, but most importantly, we reduce that amount of so-called rejected energy, the waste heat, by about 2/3 or more. And I think that is the game changer of electrification that I think drives everything else. That means higher efficiency in terms of economic efficiency if you get prices right. I come to that later on. But it also means that we eliminate a lot of the air pollution that is associated with burning fossil fuels and all of the upstream impact on the environment and so forth. So this is a very major reconfiguration of the energy system as we know it. And of course, this is a thought experiment. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we can do this tomorrow. I'm not going to say this is what happens. This is something that could happen if we tried to get our act together. But I think this is the most important point I wanted to make on electrification and why it's so critical. And you may say this will never happen, but look at Norway. And you've probably seen this chart before. I shared this very, very widely, and you can see just the speed at which Norway managed to pivot from almost no electric vehicles being sold to now almost 100%. I think the latest data I checked indicated in February 12 internal combustion engine vehicles were sold in Norway, and all the other ones were actually not just electric, but fully battery electric. I think that's the unique feature of Norway. Even hybrids are now being squeezed out almost entirely. And that happened only over the course of about a decade. And that's new sales, right? It's not the stock. The stock is about 32% or so is now battery electric. But new sales, the transition is now complete when it comes to new sales, which is incredible. The other, and this is actually a great example for Finland, the other good example is the transition from heating oil, which started way back, of course, triggered by the energy crisis in the 70s, to electric energy in Finland, in Norway, and in Sweden. And you can see here in red, heating oil as a share of residential heating in those countries, and in green, the share of heat pumps that provide heating. And again, you see that X transition that is very common when you look at historic transitions, and this is just going to continue, because sales now of heat pumps when it comes to single-family home heating systems in Norway, in Finland, and Sweden is almost 100%. There's no more fossil fuel systems being sold. So it can happen, but it needs the right policy environment. And of course, these are small countries. They have low-cost electricity at large, and they have a very preferential tax system. So there are lots of factors at play here. But I'm just going to say this can happen under the right conditions. Let me now maybe look at industry, because this is one of the, topics dear to the heart of many policymakers right now, competitiveness. And I think, Christian, you mentioned decarbonisation, not deindustrialisation. The potential for electrification in industry, I always thought, would be relatively small because of the high temperatures. And I was so wrong. We looked at this in quite some detail recently in a global study, looking at all of the best engineering studies out there, and 1,600 plus scenarios modeling energy pathways. And what we found is that, according to that evidence, with existing technology, 90% in the long run electrification of process heat in industry is technically possible. Whether that's economic or not, again, that depends on how we deal with some of the incentives and the policies. But technically speaking, industry is much more electrifiable than commonly thought. And there's many other people saying that now. I mean, you can look at the studies from Agora Energiewende have done a great study. Fraunhofer Institute come to very similar conclusions, for example. So industry is much further ahead. I think if we let it, there's huge potential there. And one of the key levers to unlock this, I really think is so important, is the ratio of electricity prices to gas prices or any other alternatives to electricity, which may also be oil or maybe coal. And you see here, if that ratio is very, very high, the deployment of electrified technologies is very low. So the UK, this is heat pumps. You see the penetration of heat pumps here for the UK is very low, bottom right corner. And you see Norway in the top left corner, very high penetration of heat pumps. This is in heat pumps per 1,000 households installed. This is a stock. And you see that that ratio, when it widens, leads to much fewer installations. That is the key driver. It's not a perfect correlation, but it's a pretty strong correlation, as you can see here if you look at the statistics. And the same relationship holds when you look at other electrification technologies, perhaps not as strong for industrial electrification yet or electric vehicles, but this is, I believe, one of the key levers. If we can make electricity more cost competitive and the operational savings exceed the capital investment cost, the market will pivot. And that's why we've seen what happened in Norway. That's why we've seen what happened with heat pumps in Sweden, Norway, and Finland. And I believe we can see the same in other sectors if we get this right. This is not just electricity markets, because a lot of the costs the end user actually sees on the bill is taxation, it's policy costs, and some countries have done very well in tackling that, but there's quite a few that have not, and we're still in a situation where we overtax electricity when it comes to the impact it has on the environment, and we undertax fossil fuels in many countries, not all countries, but in many countries there's a real imbalance between that, which is not helpful at all when we want to electrify. So we need policymakers to have, I think, a clear framework. France, we just had a conversation again about that last night at dinner, have put forward quite a bold electrification strategy. Canada have done the same, but I haven't seen many other countries around the world doing that after the crisis. And I know we're all waiting for the new electrification action plan coming out of the European Commission, hopefully before the summer break. But I think we need more of that. We need more strategic industrial policy, long-term thinking. Otherwise, all of this is just going to be pie in the sky thinking. It's never going to happen. It needs strategic planning, forward-looking policy, and not patchwork. And I think muddling through is not going to be good enough for this. I think we need a bit more than that. Let me now conclude, and maybe you have time for one or two questions if that's allowed from the audience, or maybe that is not allowed. I don't know. But I wanted to leave you with a quote from Henry Ford, which I think is brilliant. If I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And I think there's so much truth in that, because we are so stuck in the present. It's so hard to imagine what a future could look like. Because we can't really think through how we would get there, possibly. But when you ask people 150 years ago, they would have felt quite similar about the future that we now live in. They would think that's completely deluded. It's never going to happen. So I think we have to be optimistic, and we have to be passionate in believing that change is possible, rather than think about all the reasons why it is not. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you have a great conference.
Really interesting, really, really interesting. And I love, you're sort of echoing what we just heard with the pragmatism there of actually seizing the opportunity and seeing what can be done. Really interesting stuff. Did you want to take a couple of questions?
Well, if we have time. I know we were slightly over time before, so I didn't want to, wanted to leave a bit of contingency.
We can, any show of hands in the audience? Anyone who, down here we got loads. Can I have a microphone down here, or do you want me to use one of the ones on the stage? Tell you what, I'm going to go for this one, and I'll keep hold of it. Oh, you've got one there. So there's one just coming just behind you. And raise your hand again for me. It's the gentleman down at the front. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Sasha. Thanks, Jan, as always. Fascinating presentation. I especially liked the comparison between gas and electricity prices. So for the audience who don't know me, my name is Bruce Douglas. I'm the CEO of the Global Renewables Alliance. What do you think about a policy of moving taxation from electricity to general taxation as a solution to that?
Bruce, thank you.
I'm still mic'd up, of course. I was waiting for the microphone there. I think that is, so you're asking, well, moving policy costs to general taxation, that was the question. Is that a good idea?
From electricity. So high taxation on electricity now is 3 to 4 times higher in some countries than gas. Yeah. To accelerate what you're showing, just simply move them to general taxation.
I mean, that is exactly what Germany have done, right? I mean, they had the EEG for the feed-in tariffs for renewables, and that was a significant cost for German consumers and electricity. And in 2023, the German government decided to move that away from electricity bills into general taxation. Of course, there's a huge cost of that, but they pay for it with the revenues from the emissions trading system, at least partly. So I think it is one of the approaches that exist It's certainly politically much more feasible than transferring them to other energy carriers, which is much more problematic politically.
Jan, thank you. We have another question. I think there was I saw quite a few hands up over the other side. Do we got a microphone there, or is it the same one? Yep, if we can. Yep, there's a microphone coming just to your left-hand side now. Lovely, thank you. Great. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself first, please. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Maximo Micinelli. I'm heading Flash from Hillier Energy and Climate. Thank you so much for the presentation. Your chart is fantastic, the one you put together and showed, how globally we can, electrification can make the difference. But can you tell us a little bit about what does it mean for grids, that chart? Because that's where the trillions needs to go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, of course. I mean, we're talking about maybe 3 times, maybe even 4 times more electricity, depending on also what you project in terms of population increase and economic activity. We just looked at the status quo, so 100%. And the amount of investment that we need to see will have to go up. I think just on Monday, I saw the IEA put out a new report on investment and showing that, there's an uptick, but it's not quite going up fast enough, and especially for grids, I think we're going to see a lot more investment going forward. So absolutely critical, there's no doubt.
Yeah, totally. Thank you so much for your question. We're out of time, but you are staying for the rest of
Yeah, I will.
conference. Fabulous. And you're happy if anyone approaches you?
100%.
Fabulous. Well, you heard him say it. Professor Rosenow, thank you so much. Thank you.